Thanks so much, and welcome. We're so glad that you're here, and I was very pleased with the help that I got in putting this amazing panel together. We've had a few meetings, and it's really good that the different levels, the different areas of expertise that our panelists have. As usual, I'm going to kind of be the dumb guy that owns 14 small radio stations and am probably messing up about half my IT security. So I get to ask, really? I have to do that? And they'll tell me, yeah, you really need to do that. So we're going to break this into a couple different portions. The first portion is we're going to scare you, then we're going to comfort you, and then we're going to love on you a little bit at the end. And then toward the end, we're going to have some takeaways. In fact, I would encourage you, if you have a smartphone, to get ready to take some pictures of the screen. Hopefully you'll be able to zoom in on it and see it. Because we'll have some things you can take home. And some of them you're probably already doing. Others you may thought, oh, I hadn't thought to do that, or yeah, I've been meaning to do that. I really need to do that. So that's the kind of thing that we're gonna talk about and leave you with. And if we have some time at the end, we'll do some Q&A. So. The way we're going to run this panel together here is we're going to cover some topics first and see what each of our panelists has to say about these topics from their different perspectives. Now, of course, me being an engineer for some small radio stations, I just try to keep things working. Now, Matt Levin down there, he tries to keep things working while keeping everybody safe and letting the stations, actually put on the air what they got to put on the air. Now, Noah, his job, he works with a lot with small businesses and even some home people, and the idea there is to keep people from basically hurting themselves, which they're very apt to do. And Amy here, she has to keep secure this huge mortgage company while still letting people, actually get mortgages, since that's important to their business plan. So we each have a different perspective on this, and hopefully we'll bring it all home to what we can do as broadcasters to make our situations more safe. So, get started with IT security mayhem, a few horror stories for you. And Matt, you're just full of horror stories, so why don't we let you...
Well, I had to pick one.
Yeah.
So if everybody remembers those crypto wall and ransomware attacks that were happening a few years ago, well, of course, unfortunately, one of the LPFMs, and there you go, LPFM that I took care of, got hit really early on before any of us really knew what those things were. Matter of fact, I had to make a call to somebody. I'm like, okay, I've heard about these, but wow, this is the first one I've seen. So I had very firsthand experience with one of those things really early on. The manager of the station, one-man operation, had 3 computers, an on-air production and an office computer in his little radio station. And he opened up an email with an attachment, and he opened the attachment even though he wasn't expecting one and really shouldn't have opened it. But of course, from his office computer, he had access to the share on the main automation system, as did the production box. So they all talked back, as he'd sometimes download some stuff via FTP and push it over. Well, obviously, the first thing those things go out and do, that we now know and figured out then real quick, is they go and attack the network shares first. So it quickly encrypted his entire media drive on his automation system, rendering his automation system useless. So, of course, he panicked, called me, and I called a friend of mine and who's sitting here with me today and helped me. We figured out how to get around that and isolated where it came from, cleaned the machine. Thankfully, he was using Carbonite to back up his files, but this is in a very, very rural area with a WISP for internet, which was not very good. So it took 7 days for him to restore his audio files. And by the way, he did end up losing a few. He got most of his stuff back, but he ended up losing a few. So, if you don't know the source of an email.
If it took that long to recover, to download all the saved files, I would imagine the playlist was a bit short the first couple of days.
Well, he was off for about a day.
Oh, okay.
LPFM, so, the tolerances there are a little more lenient, but he was off for a day.
Before we go much farther, thank you for that story. And we'll talk a bit more about ransomware as we move along here. We have a couple ideas on how to avoid a lot of that. Amy Scites, being the corporate sort of person she is, she has a disclaimer, I think, that she'd probably like to let us all in on.
Yeah.
And I really want to be disclaimed, so please go ahead.
Yeah, so I would probably speak on the behalf of all of us that our views and opinions of our own and not those of the organization that we work for. And any of the advice that we provide today should not replace legal counsel. So please understand, those disclaimers. I work on the governance side of the IT security, so just understand those things in advance. So there's that.
To riff just a bit on the ransomware, my business partner in our radio stations is a member of the International Broadcasters Idea Bank, and these are mostly small, medium, a couple large market broadcasters, and they get together twice a year to share business ideas, what's helping them, what's not helping them, and a couple of them have been hit by ransomware as well, and it's really hurt their operations terribly, until they got everything cleaned up. And of course now they know some of the things they could do to either not let it happen or to clean up a lot quicker after it does happen. Noah, Auman, you consult with a lot of small office, home office businesses, and some bigger ones too. So do you have a horror story that can scare the boots off of our audience here?
Well, my favorite horror story right now is a hotel we were working for here locally. Long story short, we had been pitching our managed services, which I'm a huge proponent of because they were very unprotected on just about every level. And after about 3 to 6 months of denying the services, they got a phone call, someone at the front desk about 6 a.m. saying, hello, we're with Central Front Desk Support and we need to update your system. So, of course, whoever's at the front desk lets them on the machine. They install VNC, and they inadvertently install a keylogger. Now, that keylogger captured every password that was typed into that machine, including email addresses and their reservation software. So the cherry on the cake here is that when that happened, the hackers began calling the people that recently made reservations with them, saying that there was a problem with their credit card and asking them to verify their information. So 4 credit cards got taken before they caught on to it and called me in to assess the situation. Well, the system had full administrative access. Their antivirus was basically turned off just by a couple clicks, and they were able to install Keylogger and gain all that password information. So that's a telltale story.
Lots of bad things can happen when people who are unauthorized, and sometimes even people authorized, are using your computer systems. One thing that we've mentioned a couple times now is ransomware, and that's one of the most fearful things for broadcasters. Amy, we've all heard the term. Some of us know a lot about it, a little bit about it. There are actual going businesses, typically not in the U.S., that even advertise for jobs and have retirement programs. These businesses write ransomware. I mean, these are going businesses in business locations in fuzzy places around the world. Amy, would you explain a bit more about ransomware and what happens when a person clicks a link that they shouldn't be clicking on and ransomware takes over their computer?
So what I found is that some people may not understand what ransomware really is. When a user, and it can be propagated different ways, but mostly through phishing attempts. So when a user clicks on a link or an attachment within an email, what happens is malicious code starts to surreptitiously go out and propagate through file shares and connected networks and generally reach to your file server. And what it does is that then it starts encrypting files, one and one and one. And it is absolutely impossible to unencrypt those files. So what they do is you receive a message that says, prompts you to pay money, usually in the form of Bitcoin or something cryptocurrency, to release those files. What you generally don't want to do is you do not want to pay the ransom because there's no guarantee you're going to get those files back. So that's why networks get shut down, and the result of that is the one click on the one email can shut down an entire company, which people don't really look at until they think of it like that. So at that point, you're really relying on your backups and your restores and things like that to back up. The phone calls is really about authorization. So when you receive a phone call, you want to educate your users to understand if they get a phone call from somebody, make sure that they are authenticating that person. Hey, this is Amy from the IT department. We've determined your system's been compromised. I need to get on your system to check things out, things like that. So just make sure you're educating everybody in the office to know that if they get a phone call like that they need to authenticate that person somehow. And they can do that through a company directory. They can say, I'm not familiar with you. I'm going to hang up the phone and call our IT company back directly. And those are really great things to know because it's actually happened a few times that I know of.
So there are a lot more horror stories, and you may have had some of your own. Obviously, the bad guys get more sophisticated. Years and years ago, like 20 plus years ago, I put a computer on the air at our new radio station in American Samoa. And it was an automation computer, and I guess it was Audio Vault. And that was back in the day when the ISP would hand you a few public IP addresses. And you didn't know what a router was. We didn't have a router. They just gave us a Ethernet connection and said, here, just plug a hub into that, and here are your 5 public IP addresses. Have fun. We'll enjoy taking your money. And so I just plugged a Windows computer into this, and lo and behold, it had a public IP address. And this was Windows XP, I suppose. Was XP around in 1999? 98?
No, Windows.
Oh, it would have been Windows 98. Okay. So you had no firewall whatsoever. No. Well, the thing ran along for a year just fine till somebody discovered it and wiped out our C drive. Now, luckily, all the songs were on the D drive, so we just had to rebuild Windows, and we were actually back up and running in a day. And for American Samoa, that was blazingly fast. Obviously, users are more sophisticated now. We have 100 IP addresses in use in our little Samoan radio station, and we have 1 public IP address. That's the way that things work now. Now let's move to threats that are around right now today that you or your employees, your colleagues may have gotten an email about today. And I'll give you an example. Someone has been spear phishing employees at my employer, the Telos Alliance. I keep getting emails from Tom Swidarski. Now, Tom is our new CEO. He's been around for about a year now at the Telos Alliance. And the subject line is usually something like, hey, I got something I need for you to do. Well, that's something a CEO might say. And, you feel a little bit privileged being emailed by the CEO. He's got something he needs for me to do. Well, all right, I'll be able to score some points with the CEO today. Until you look at the actual return address. I mean, it says Tom Swidarski, but the address it actually came from, was XYZ My Bad Guy Fishing Spearfishing Company.com.ru. So, sorry, that's the way it is. So, it became quickly obvious to me that this wasn't real. But for 1 second, I believed Tom Swidarski was emailing me, and I was kind of glad about it. And we've had also I do weather on the weekends at a Meredith TV station in Nashville, WSMV, and we get that pretty frequently. Somebody is acting like they're either the CEO or the VP of this or that within Meredith Corporation, and their IT they have a full-time IT department, and they send out warning emails. Hey, you may have gotten an email that looks like this. Don't click on, don't reply to it. So even though there are horror stories that may have happened in the past, threats are present now, and they always will be. And these threats come in, as we've mentioned here, a couple different ways. Well, we've talked about one, which is getting you to click on a link. And that kind of engineering works apparently well enough to keep these companies in business. We're going to have some information on other types of attacks, penetration attacks coming in from the outside. Amy, I think you had something to say about current attacks. Let's see, BEC and wire scams and that kind of thing. What do you want to say about that?
I think you need to switch the.
Oh, is it time to switch?
I think so.
Oh, yes, active threat. Thank you very much.
You're welcome. So to support, the targeted phishing called spear phishing is some of it is now called business email compromise. So if and an example of that is when a CEO is trying to reach out to you to get something, a fake CEO. What I'm seeing now is that they're going to the employees. So what they'll do is they're engaged in a conversation, right? Like, hey, what's going on? And let's not forget that most of these emails that we look at are on our phones, right? We're not really looking at the email address, which is probably something completely different than the employee that's sending it to you. So, hey, what's going on? So you reply, oh, nothing. Hey, can you do me a favor? And you're like, sure. What can I do for you? Like, hey, I need these gift cards. Can you send me, reach out? I need these gift cards. I don't have time. Can you get them for me and send me the serial numbers off of them? So that is an attack that I've seen. But again, if anybody is trying to get you to send them any type of form of payment, obviously that's a good one. But some employees may not know that. So you need to advocate these types of stories to support those, especially if they're wire scams. Anytime somebody's trying to send you any type of request for payment, I would be very, very cautious and very suspicious on those types of things too.
I got exactly that. Somebody purporting to be one of my colleagues started texting me. And on text was saying, "Hey Kirk, I need you to do something for me. I need you to go down to Walgreens and get some iTunes gift cards." And it was a big ask. He was asking for $1,000 in iTunes gift cards, and then he even said, "Hey, don't worry about it," because I thought it was I was getting scammed. I thought, well, you want me to FedEx them to you? He said, no, just scrape off the back and take a picture of the back of each one. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute now, how are we going to give that to a client? And so then I started having fun with this person.
Yes.
I won't mention the person's name, but it was. I thought, I know this is a scam, but I'm just going to keep him going for a while. So I started asking him, "Hey, are you and your wife getting along okay?" And he said, "Well, yeah." I said, "Well, I just want to tell you, I've always thought you were pretty handsome." And I said, "That time that we went to Indianapolis together, I really wanted to, make sure we had dinner and had a time to talk together, things like that." Well, he wasn't flapped at all. He just kept right on with it. "No, I need you to scratch those cards off and send me pictures right away." And the guy was relentless. I mean, I was having fun with him, and the guy was just relentless. So, and he didn't. I don't know. And then I started saying more and more things to him. I said a couple of rather lewd things to him, and he just kept going. So. Anyway, obviously, the cards didn't happen, and neither did anything else. So, did you guys have any modern, contemporary threats that are happening you've seen just recently?
The biggest thing I'm seeing is the email stuff.
The spear phishing?
Now, thank goodness most of our staff is pretty good about forwarding them on to me and going, "This looks suspicious." And first thing I do is look at where it's really coming from, and I reply back, "Yeah, look at the header. It's not from who it says it's from." And then a lot of times I'll take that email and then forward it out to the whole company as an example and go, "If you see stuff like this isn't..." Because typically, you guys have all seen this, if it hits one person in your company, by the end of the next 2 days, it's going to hit everybody. Because it seems like they go down and just start looking at every possible combination at your domain they can find. So there's a high likelihood that after that first one comes in, everybody's going to get hit with it at some point. So forward it out to all your employees and go, "Look, this is probably going to be hitting your inbox. Delete it. It's a scam." So that's the biggest one I've been seeing lately.
Noah, how about locally here?
What we've been seeing, probably more than anything, especially at a residential letter, is people calling people. These hackers are saying that there's problems with their computer, there's packets coming out of their network, or whatever's wrong with their computer, or they're with the ISP company, and that they're going to have to shut them down or send the FBI after them, whatever. Left and right, these people are letting these hackers into their machine to fix their issues, and they end up locking them down and requiring money to get it unlocked. We've seen a huge increase that in just this year.
I've been surprised for years. I avoided the calls. I never got the calls, but recently I have twice here gotten the calls of, "We have been watching your computer, and you have a virus." And so I usually put that accent right back on and talk back to them. And,
to show you the blanket, though, of that, it's like we get people calling our office, which is a computer store, saying that there's problems with our networks and is sending out bad virus packets and et cetera. So we mess with them as much as we can.
So what to do? And we have I think we have a second slide about more of a corporate. What was the second slide we had? Yeah, the one with your diagram. Okay, so we're going to hit the first part of what to do about this, and that's that's going to be a lot of the take homes. We'll have the take homes on the final slides, but what to do about this? So we each are covering this from a different angle. And we have so many topics here. Amy, do you want to start here? Because you got all your pretty pink ones here and the highlighted stuff here. Go ahead.
So I thought this was important because I find a lot of us, something happens, and it might seem like a big deal, and you're like, "Oh my gosh, what do I do?" I've been there, and you're like, "What do we do?" So I wanted to just educate you guys on if something happens and it's considered an incident, what really should you do, and the things that I find that are helpful. The first thing I think you should do is you really need to identify somebody to take the lead. So if there's an incident and you guys are all scrambling, you need to take one person and make them the lead person to go over everybody else. And that might seem obvious, However, what if that person's not there that day? You need to have some sort of level of succession to identify somebody to take the leads. And then after that, you need to assign roles to certain people for them to understand what the responsibility is to do certain things. So it's a little bit more of a organized and then versus the chaotic, right? After that, you need to understand what you're going to communicate. There's an issue, something might be impacted, so let's have a conversation of reach out to the employees or whoever might be impacted to send a message. But you need to know what you're going to say. You're going to need to know who you're going to send it to and how often. And I would say at least keep people engaged about every half of the day, in the morning. And then if it's still impacted through the middle of the day, let them know. If it doesn't impact a lot of people, but it might be a serious issue that the employees don't know about, make sure you're keeping your executive management involved and understanding who's going to send that communication out, right? So you don't have multiple people informing different people. So that's why the roles are really, really important. So from my perspective, that's what I see. So assign somebody, identify roles, and then know what to communicate, when to communicate, and to who to communicate.
Sounds like a lot of what you're describing there is what might happen at a large company, a larger broadcaster, but the same principles can apply to smaller organizations, even if it's just that, hey, our on-staff engineer, our consulting engineer, or maybe our IT services are consulted out or hired out to a guy like Noah. Well, let's bring Noah if we think there's something wrong, like if we get a ransomware email, or if we somehow discover that, somebody has found out all of our employees' email addresses, or we find that people are, hey, 3 of our employees just had credit card breaches. Maybe we ought to bring Noah in. In other words, have that little plan in place. At least we're bringing somebody in to do that. At my little radio station in Mississippi and in Hawaii and Samoa, that's what I would do. I would bring in our somebody that we consult with for IT and say, hey, we need some help here. What's a good way to go about this?
If it's a big issue, real quick, if it's a big issue, my other recommendation is you want to engage legal counsel quickly, because what happens with legal counsel is that, and you think it's serious, is that any information that you have at that time can be protected and it's privileged. So it's protected from release without the client's permission. So that's really important. So that would be my recommendation for that.
Noah, would you like to add to what you consult your clients on when they know that, something has gone wrong here and people's information could be at risk?
Well, for that matter, I will say that most small businesses have no policy. So a lot of the clients that we acquire, they bring us in when that situation happens because they had no previous IT guy or whatever methods they had previously just weren't working. And it just boils down to you got to define that policy. You got to make sure your employees know who to call, who's legit, who's not. Because like in the instance of the horror story I told you, whoever's on the phone is supposedly legitimate to them, and they need to understand that that's not.
Yeah,
You got anything on that, man?
Okay.
No, the only thing I would say to that is with my staff in particular, my response to them has always been, if you suspect something, if you're in the dock on the wired network, take it out, turn the Wi-Fi off, bring me the laptop immediately. I've got my own tools that I'm going to run, but the first thing I want to do is get that machine off the network. If they are suspicious of anything, I want it off the network right away, because you don't know what type of threat you're dealing with. So getting it off the network where it can propagate and spread, for me, is priority number 1 with my staff, and then further diagnosing it from there on.
Yeah,
isolating, yeah.
I'm wondering about, Amy, in your business, you have a lot of information about a lot of people, customers, and employees too, in employee databases. Radio stations, we might have some files that are employee files online somewhere, but other than that, we might have prize winners' names, maybe, if we have a program that keeps track of that. But I'm thinking, what in a broadcast facility, and let's say it's not a huge corporate conglomerate, but let's say it's something of a more medium or small size. Matt, what's your experience? What do we have that might put the public at risk? And I'm thinking not much in most facilities.
I think for most stations, not much.
Okay.
We're not collecting credit card data. I mean, we might have a prize database. We might have addresses at most. I know for us, for any nonprofits who do fundraising, obviously we don't want that fundraising pledge data on any of our systems. We let a third party handle that for the very reasons we're talking about. So none of that credit card or financial data hits any of our servers. It's all handled by a third party cloud application when we do our fundraisers. And I don't know, is anybody in the room that's nonprofit and does fundraising? Do any of you guys handle any of that financial data in-house? Yeah, so I would tend to say most of us stay away from that for these very reasons.
Some big retailers have figured out it's smarter to let third parties just handle all that and tokenize the credit card number and everything. We know nothing about you. All we have is your money, which is what the retailer's after, right?
Yeah.
That's all they really need. So this slide here, Amy, you want to talk about this slide for just a minute and let people take a picture if they want to?
Absolutely. So this is just steps you can take if there's an incident. And what really is the biggest aspect of this is identifying what type of information might be sensitive. So how you can identify that is if the information's not already public. You know what I mean? If addresses are public already, names are public already, but anything that outside of that you can uniquely identify an individual that's not public information, that is compromised, from unauthorized use, and that you can firmly believe that there's some sort of malicious intent that can happen, identity fraud that can happen to that information, then it's important that you understand those things and know the steps to take in that event. Also, other things to think about if there's an issue with any type of information that could be potentially sensitive is that it's important that you do not destroy any evidence in case that has to go to court. I absolutely firmly recommend bringing in the experts because if there's evidence, you have to have somebody to testify to the accuracy of that evidence. So bringing in an expert is just a supportive way to do that. So it's a really nice way to, and again, every organization is going to be different. Obviously, it may not be set up this way to your organization, but this is just like a nice visual aid for everyone that may help in the event.
But even a small or medium broadcaster that doesn't have a team of lawyers on staff or at the other end of the phone, these principles can still apply. You just apply them in a smaller way to your own operations. Let's move on now to policies. You want to talk on this topic a bit, or you want to skip on to minimizing mayhem?
I can do very high level.
Yeah, this is high level policy. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, so policies can look different from everybody. They're important. My approach to policies is that it's not just safeguarding information. I approach security from what can we do as an organization to reduce our liability in the event you get sued, right? So it's really important to understand those aspects, and it's not if you're going to get something's going to happen. It's really when something's going to happen. So at the end of the day, it's reducing that liability. So policies are a good thing to have in place. It's just a set of rules that govern your organization, and they're really not difficult to implement. They don't have to be complicated, and they need to be realistic. So if you get some policies in place, just make sure that they're realistic to your organization. Take out any type of fluff. Just to make sure that they're applicable and they're realistic to your organization.
So when you're speaking of policies that affect an end user, somebody who works at a desk, whether they're a sales assistant or a salesperson or whatever it may be, what would some typical policies look like for the end user?
So for smaller companies, that could be just acceptable use, which
yeah.
So and a lot of times that's just in your handbook, but that allows your organization to know what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, because a lot of people will have things on their computer they're not supposed to be doing, or visiting websites they're not supposed to be visiting because they don't know they're not supposed to. So just clearly defining, setting expectations is really what the policies do, and they're just a set of rules that govern your organization.
So this just actually came down at the Telos Alliance. It was probably a part of about a 5-year review, and all the employees were notified, hey, remember, if you're using one of our computers, we're entitled to look at anything that's on that computer anytime. To my knowledge, Telos doesn't have any spying software on our computers, but they'd be entitled to. It's their computer, right? So reminding employees about acceptable use. Matt, what do you think about acceptable use policies for employees and their computers and the networks to which they're attached?
Yeah, might be network security.
Well, I mean, so our general manager has a automated thing in Outlook that every year at the same date he sends out one of those company use policies, and it basically alludes to the same thing. Remember, these are work computers, while occasional personal use we're not going to hit you up for, it is a work computer, so you really should minimize that. But one of my big policies from a network standpoint at our facility is I want no non-company devices on my internal network. So we have a guest network, our conference rooms, the wired connections are on that guest network. We'll give out the guest password, but our internal Wi-Fi and our internal network, we only turn on, I only light up the ports that are plugged into laptops or workstations in the building, and I don't allow any external devices that aren't ours on our internal network.
Yeah, that's a really good point. At all of my radio stations, I've got a guest Wi-Fi network, but I also have an admin Wi-Fi network, and it would allow access to anything that you want to get onto. And you know what? I can't think of an employee that needs to have Wi-Fi access to our operational systems.
They shouldn't.
I just learned I need that. That's one of my takeaways. I need to go actually shut that Wi-Fi off because it doesn't. If you need to be on Wi-Fi in my radio station, you can get on our guest network, which only goes to the internet. Doesn't go anywhere.
That's the same with
else.
ours. And even people that bring in their cell phones, we allow everybody to put their cell phones on our guest Wi-Fi, so they're not eating up data while they're at work because everybody wants our Exchange server on their phone. But again, it's not our device. We can't control it.
Yeah.
We can control our own devices. We can't control people's devices that they bring in. So okay, fine. You're going to be relegated to the guest network, which is on its own network, on its own internet connection even.
Oh, wow. Okay.
So we have our main internet connection for our business use, and that guest network has a separate UVerse, and that's all you get. It's UVerse. Once you eat up that, it's sorry.
So if people want to hack you from the guest Wi-Fi network, they might as well stay home and try to hack you there because it's the same thing.
Pretty much.
Noah, did you have anything to add regarding policies? When a company brings you in to fix a problem they've had, you say, I really suggest you do these things. Policy-wise. And we're going to get some real specifics in our last slides, but just generally speaking.
Well, the only point I really want to make is that once you define policy, it's easier to implement the actual items that solve those problems. Rather than looking at it as, I just need security, what do I do? Defining that policy first really puts a handle on it and what you need to do.
So, minimizing mayhem. I guess we can talk about some specific things here, but again, we're going to summarize all these in the last 5 slides with things you can take pictures of, or should. So minimizing mayhem, we've been talking a lot about internal threats, like people clicking on links, right? That's obviously a bad thing. Or if they bring in a computer or device that already has some malware on it, that's just looking for a place to go. But let's talk about threats that come in from the outside. I told you earlier about my radio station in Samoa back in, I think it was really 1999. Yeah, it was 19 years ago. It wasn't any trouble at all for somebody coming from the outside. My D drive was out there flapping in the breeze, and anybody could look at it, and somebody did, and decide to format C or something like that. With today's systems, I should say when we first built our stations in Mississippi, I needed remote access by VNC, and the easiest way to do that at the moment was just to forward some ports. Now, VNC typically works on port 5900. You can change that, but what I did was port translation, and I chose some really high numbered ports that were kind of random looking, and I did port translation to translate, hey, if I come in on port 50329, that means go to my .32 machine, port 5900. And we've done that for a while, but we recently killed most of those port forwards because we were able to implement VPN in our router. And it's a rather old VPN. It's PPTP VPN, which is known to be not. Yeah, I know. Everybody's shaking. I'm getting up there. I'm working on it.
Better than port forwarding.
Yes, better than port forwarding a bit. So yes, we've killed almost all of those port forwards. But we're broadcasters. Now sometimes we do have to get to equipment that is on our network, and maybe a more ideal situation. I've been to a few stations. Some friends of mine, engineers for a particular broadcaster, the IT department just controlled everything, which made it very difficult to. Yeah, but I need for this codec to have these ports open to the outside world. No. Well, then we can't do broadcasts, and that's kind of what we do here. So one guy, he ordered his own Comcast to come in and make his own drop, and that Comcast only goes to the ports on the Ethernet connections on the codecs that have to go to the outside world. Okay, well, and now. Sure, the codec could possibly have a vulnerability. Like Telos makes a Zip 1 that has a WAN port and a LAN port. and you can separate their functionalities. And supposedly there's no good way to get from one to the other. I don't know if there really is or not, but our developers say you can't do it, which means you probably can. You just don't know how. So thinking about things like this, broadcasters need external access more than just remote desktop access. We got to actually send and receive audio from devices in order to be on the air. So Matt, you've got some experience in this. Can you talk to us about doing this as safely as possible?
Yeah, so my rule of thumb is the only thing that I'm going to open up, that I have opened up, is the zip one that we use for remote broadcasts. That's it. To me, there's no reason to have anything else open to the rest of the world. Unfortunately, like you said, in a lot of cases, you may be trying to dial it via cellular or Wi-Fi, and let's be honest, when you need to get on, you need to get on in a quick fashion. So opening up that specific port to that one zip one is all I've got open. All my transmitter sites, I have site-to-site VPN tunnels. I don't want anything else open to the world, and I hate having honestly, I don't like having that zip one open, but again, that's part of broadcasting, and we have to have that. But anywhere where I can shut those ports down and use VPN tunnels, so all 3 transmitter sites have site-to-site tunnels, and then all my traffic is just running across that tunnel, and it's all encrypted. So I'd say that's when you can use site-to-site tunnels, you really should. Unfortunately, I know an awful lot of broadcasters who, at their transmitter sites, don't want to spend the money on the devices that can do those site-to-site tunnels and just open up those ports to the world for RDS encoders and EAS equipment and codecs and all kinds of stuff. And I just cringe. In fact, I've worked with a couple, and I've suggested I don't have any control over it, but I've said over and over again, you have got to find some budget money to get some firewalls in here and get these things secured on a site-to-site tunnel for all your sites.
You can do site-to-site tunneling with a $100 router, really. I mean,
it doesn't take a lot.
I tend to use MikroTik routers, which have a PPTP VPN wizard. Unfortunately, it's a little complex to set up something else, at least for me. I've got to figure out how to do that.
I would recommend something a little better than PPTP.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. Better than PPTP.
SSL, IPsec, something better than PPTP. So it just so happens we use Sonic walls, and for the client, so we use a client-side remote VPN for the computers that's SSL, and then the site-to-site, I can't remember the exact negotiation on the site-to-sites on those. IKE. IKE, yeah. So that's just the device we use, but you can do this on numerous devices. Yeah. But it needs to be a secure path, for sure.
One of the things we were going to talk about was password management. Amy has some ideas about passwords, and I bet Noah does too. The other day, about 6 months ago, my wife got an email that says, "Oh, we have been looking at your computer, and you have been visiting porn sites. And you are using this username and this password." And so my wife came to me and she says, "You've been using my password to visit any place?" I said, "No, not at all." She said, I said, "Well, that looks like one of your passwords, and that looks like one of your usernames." She said, "Yeah, it is." I said, "Well, okay, let's look into this." Well, I got the same email just last week. And so I happen to use LastPass as a password manager. And so I do have unique passwords for a lot of sites, not every single one. And then this really made me realize. I looked at the password that this email that they said they had from me, and I believe they do. They compromised some site, got usernames and passwords, and yes, it's a password that I had commonly used for a lot of sites I didn't consider that I needed a lot of security at. But now that person has my username and password for a lot of sites. Although thankfully none of them are. Actually, I was checking on them. About a third of them are sites that are no longer there, like mybookshelf.com. I ordered a book there one time, apparently. And so I was going through my whole list of LastPass passwords and sites that used that password, and I was surprised at how many of them are no longer in business or no longer reachable on the internet anyway. Maybe they were put out of business by these scammers, ordering books and not paying for them. But having a password manager has been super, super helpful, and I can make complex passwords. And at my banking sites now, and my credit card sites, I don't even know what the password is. I have no idea. I have to ask LastPass to put it in for me because it's gobbledygook. Is that a good practice? Amy, you had some things to say about passwords, then we'll ask Noah and Matt.
Well, I mean, the first thing is that passwords are my nemesis. as a security professional, I hate passwords. So, I mean, my question is to you guys, who uses like an Excel spreadsheet?
For password?
Yeah, for passwords. Anybody use an Excel spreadsheet?
I think my mom does.
I think a lot of people do. Anybody use an actual password manager? Oh, that's amazing. So just to understand that everything has risks. I'm not going to tell you a password manager is not going to get hacked one day, because there's the propensity for that to happen. So when you use a solution, you just need to make sure that you understand risks and secure that solution as much as possible. So if you have something that's utilizing your passwords, you need to make sure that password is not documented anywhere and is much more sophisticated, because once you have that password to your password manager, you really don't need to know the rest of the passwords. And something else to think about when you use a password manager is that they can do the auto passwords for you. The nice thing that I found about that is that when you're coming to find out that your password's been compromised in a breach somewhere, and they tell you that if there's a compromise, like, oh, your system's been hacked. I had a friend that had her Amazon was hacked. She's like, Amy, what do I do? My Amazon account's been hacked. I'm like, well, you need to change your password. But also, that password you use on that website, you need to identify every other site that has that password. And you need to change that password there, because what happens is you have these major botnets that go out, and they automatically check all these sites, because we are notorious for being lazy and to use passwords over and over again, right? So, and I'm not gonna lie, I've reused passwords before. My password manager is nice, the fact that they'll do those crazy different passwords, and then I don't have to worry about trying to identify which accounts have reused that password at the same time, right? So that's one of the reasons why I think that using a password manager is beneficial. Also, another thing, if you guys want to see if your password or your email has been compromised in a breach, I have a good solution for you. It's called haveibeenpwned.com, and how you spell that is haveibeen, PWND.com. Yeah. And then what you do is you enter your email. It'll tell you if it's been compromised in a breach, and then you can enter in a password, and you can see if that password's been used anywhere else. If your email's been compromised in a breach, I highly recommend you change your password. And then again, you have to identify where that password's been used in your other accounts and change your password there. And that's a big pain. So that's why the password managers is nice to have.
HaveIBeenPwned.com can't tell you all the sites that it's compromised at,
No.
but the ones that it knows about.
Yeah, so it goes to the dark web. It downloads all the breach data that's being sold on the dark web for username and passwords, and it's a collection of all these username and passwords, and then you can go in and see which ones are compromised.
Let's talk about passwords or anything on this. What to do to minimize stress. When we hit these take homes, that's actually going to have we'll have some more discussion in that. And I realize is 4:30 our time to get out of here? Yeah. Oh gosh. Okay. Let's just move on to onto that.
Let's do it.
So 5 things to do, and you know what? I need to read some of these, and I can't really see them from here, so I'm going to go stand at the other end of things and talk about it from there.
I think we'll have these available on the website too.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, yeah. When will that be? Because
That should be, once they get the pictures uploaded later this week probably.
so establish an information security policy. Review security policy or develop it now. We talked about that. Implement security by prioritizing your assets. So what would hurt you worst if it got compromised in some way? For a radio station, it'd be our on-air automation systems and our traffic and billing. Train employees to recognize suspicious emails and websites. Well, we've talked about that, and occasional email reminders are a really good thing. And when you get a suspicious email, plenty of companies will send that. Will say, "Hey, here's an email that somebody at our company got. If you get something like this, so show them an example of a suspicious email, and then use strong passwords, especially on internet-facing devices. So if you remotely get into something."
On that,
yeah.
something that we recently implemented that I recommend to you guys is passphrases. They're longer, they're harder to brute force attack, but they're way easier to remember. So
Yeah.
think of a multi-word, 3 or 4 word phrase. Change a couple of the things to a number of unique characters so you meet the complexity requirements, but it's much easier for users to remember. And remember, for brute force attacks, the longer your passwords are, the infinitely harder they are to brute force attack, so make them longer. Don't cheap out with 8 and 10 character passwords anymore. You need to go 12 or more.
There's a website. If you follow the Security Now podcast, Steve Gibson at grc.com. Yeah, he has a 3-letter web domain. He has an area of the website about passwords, and one of them is called password haystacks, and there's some other password things. But you can put in a password, and it'll tell you on average how many years it will take a government-level computer to crack that password. I mean, it's all averages. I mean, they might crack it the second time around, but probably not. And length of the password is certainly a huge factor. Also, the character set. If it's got, that's why they ask you uppercase, lowercase. Of course, I like the tilde character, and that occurs in a few of my passwords. And there's some sites that, we don't like the tilde. You'll have to use something else. So. By the way, during a recent password audit, it was found that an employee was using this password, spelled out, Mickey, Minnie, Pluto, Huey, Louie, Dewey, Donald, Goofy, Sacramento. So when asked why the employee had such a long password, the employee said, well, hello. It's supposed to be 8 characters long and include at least 1 capital. All right, hey, sir, if you're taking pictures, take a picture of this. I'm going to go to the next slide, okay? Remove unnecessary access. We hadn't talked much about this at all, but this is really good. User access for all users, it should, on Microsoft PCs, should be user level, not administrator. And how many of you said, for years we've set up Windows PCs, and until Windows 10 came along, I guess, and the default was you were an administrator. And so any malware got in there had the same rights you did at the keyboard to do whatever it wanted to. So every user should be a user. I'm sure there's the occasional exception. There are some automation systems. There's some occasional pieces of software that have to run as administrator. But you can also say, well, this one runs as administrator. Do you guys have anything to add about that real quick?
That's just one of the most powerful things you can do to secure your systems is just do not let people modify them. And you do that by revoking those administrator privileges.
Mm-hmm.
There was a report out, and this has been about 3 years ago, so Windows has gotten supposedly better since then. But 3 years ago and before, if you made all of your Windows users run as user, not as administrator, and you made them quit using Internet Explorer back when that was their big offering, if you did those 2 things, you eliminated 96% of all the possible malware threats. Just those 2 things. And if you can reduce your attack surface by that big, now I think it's a little bit different now because Windows has gotten some better on that. This is great. Amy had contributed this. Utilize principle of least privilege based on need to know. Amy, tell us what that means.
So essentially is that please do not give access to somebody unless there's an identified need for that person to have access to it. So, that's essentially what the principle of least privilege is. Give them the least amount of privilege they need to get their position accomplished, right? So it's easy thing to remember.
A great penetration test for this would be to let Matt Levin use one of your sales computers. And if he ever says, look what I can get into, then you've got a problem.
Well, and I'll tail on that. The most common thing I see is, everybody wants to get it done quick. They'll go in, create a share everyone, and not go into the users and decide who gets access to that. It's just shared to the entire network. Everywhere. So everyone has access. And guess what? If you get one of those malware programs, it doesn't matter who runs it. Doesn't matter what privileges they have. If you have that share set up like that, it's going to find it and it's going to encrypt everything in that folder.
Yeah, that's how
Noah?
Chances are if you have a third-party software set up by any third-party company and it requires a network share, it's got everyone access. 99% of the businesses that we deal with a multitude of different softwares across platforms, whatever share they have set up, it's got everyone access. And that's one of the first things you need to look at as far as shares.
And probably whatever folder or drive you're sharing probably is full of valuable information. That's why everybody has access to it.
And even to the point where they'll share the entire C drive with full read-write access rather than the individual folder.
We see it. So when you're setting up those shares, only share what's necessary and only allow privileges to those users who need access to that. And guess what? You can even limit it to read-only. And, or read-write, and then they can only modify, but they can't delete stuff.
Right.
You got to take the time to do these, or it's going to burn you later on.
So the next phrase is UAC, User Access Control. So ensure UAC is enabled in Control Panel. And I guess in Windows 10 this is by default, but no, I think you brought this up, didn't you? So tell us about UAC.
Yeah, Windows 7 has UAC enabled by default, but a lot of legacy and older types of software, UAC is one of the things that's disabled to make those softwares work. Now, I've even seen a lot of softwares installed, they'll disable UAC, and it doesn't have to be disabled. But I see that a lot on a lot of different types of legacy or older software. UAC's disabled, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, but enabling UAC really helps lock down those systems further.
And unfortunately, a lot of you guys know this, free automation systems, a lot of the automation vendors require you to turn that off. So on our automation systems, you have to take other safeguards to protect those machines because you have to turn that off. But for user workstations, it should absolutely be turned on.
I took you to task over this or said, this sounds like a real problem, but Matt, you've told me what you do on your automation machines with regard to internet access.
Yeah, so and I think it's in another slide, but we segment the network out. The broadcast machines are on a completely isolated network, and we block internet access. So basically, the business network and the automation network, both at the firewall, we block the internet access for the automation network. We do pinhole a couple things so they can copy things over to the server, a shared file server with a pretty good antivirus, file level antivirus on it. But those machines cannot go out and browse the internet, so it's kind of hard to download things and execute them because you don't have access.
And the last takeaway on this slide is set PCs to timeout, lock, and prompt for a password. As I do weekend weather at Channel 4 in Nashville, and this is the bane of my existence. Because just about the time I got done with just the latest radar thing and getting that graphic, I flip around to put my closed captioning on the Avid machine, or on the iNews machine, and it's locked out. And I've got 8 seconds to air, and I've got to unlock them. And of course, the password is sticky tape right there on the monitor. So
what's the point?
What's the point other than to make my life difficult? Okay, let's move on so we don't run out to patch management. Patch management. Anything that touches the internet, you need to monitor for updates. And what we're talking about here, of course, is new firmware versions for anything out there and new software versions. So whether it's operating systems or whether it's a new firmware version for your router. And oh my goodness, routers have so many vulnerabilities that get uncovered as time goes on. Even my beloved MikroTik router was, there were some vulnerabilities there. And of course, so many routers you buy at Walmart have things like UPnP accidentally implemented in reverse as well as forward, so that if you, from the internet, hit a certain port, you all of a sudden are UPnP'd into the person's network. This was a flaw that was discovered 4 or 5 years ago now, and there are still thousands and thousands of routers out there that have that flaw. If you just go into a certain port, like 19,000 some, you are UPnP'd into the LAN. So you got to update this stuff, and so we'll go through this. Check for updates, not less than monthly, please. Just go look and see what's. Yeah, I love my little MikroTik router. It's got a little button, check for updates, and sure enough, almost every time I do, there's an update. So I just go update all my routers at all my radio stations. Evaluate automatic updates for endpoints. What does that mean, Noah? How about we call on you? Evaluate automatic updates for endpoints.
So as far as keeping software up to date, it's just not Microsoft Windows and things like that. Third-party applications like Adobe, Java, Firefox, Chrome, all those need updated because they're constantly plugging vulnerabilities with that. So obtaining like a patch management software that automates those things can really help secure you and keep you more secure on a consistent basis rather than trying to remote in manually and update those. Also saves you a ton of time if you have a number of systems. Automating those patches is key to keeping those machines secure on a consistent basis.
Now, of course, as broadcasters, we are loath to do that on air machines, whether it's a weather graphics system or iNews software. Those kind of things need to be, okay, 2 o'clock in the morning on Sunday morning, there's not anybody in the newsroom. Let's update this at this time. And somebody may have to come in and make sure that it still works properly afterwards. It's hard to automate that kind of software that is running the broadcast facility.
With a managed service platform, you actually get control over a lot of that, and you can get monitored like alerts and things like that if patches don't go through, if systems are down as a result. So that's something you can look at.
And, Amy?
I've got a story. So I think it's really, people may not pay attention to patching. Like, patching, we should all know how to patch, right? But what I'm finding, especially since I read all the time, I'm finding that this is one of the most successful ways viruses and malicious software can penetrate an organization, is because people flat out just don't patch things. Does anybody remember the Equifax hack? That's how Equifax hack came in, because they didn't update their servers. And I think there was a patch. The patch came out a month before, and they didn't update their servers in time. So this great example is just to make sure you stay on top of it. And even with your phone, okay? Update your phone operating system, because patches are just primarily updating known vulnerabilities that can be exploited into your system. So that's a huge takeaway. It may not feel like a big one, like it seems obvious, but it is real. It's real important.
That's a good point.
I'm sorry, 99.99 some percent of vulnerabilities, known vulnerabilities, are you can make immune just by having the patch that fixes it.
Yes.
Device support end of life. So if a device goes end of life on its support, Noah, you said in our meeting, get a new device. If your router is no longer supported, you know what, brother? You need a new router. You're going to have to get one.
Absolutely.
Any comments about that, Matt? You deal with appliances all the time.
Yes, and it's if the manufacturer stops supplying security updates, that means that as hackers find new bugs in that code moving forward, there are no more patches to plug those holes. That means you become a huge security risk. So if the manufacturer stops supporting it, chances are you really need to replace it, especially if it's an internet-facing device.
Absolutely.
So we've got seconds left. So take a picture of that one if you need to. Patch management. Takeaway number 4, block unnecessary network traffic. I'm going to read this. If you guys have something key to say, let me know. Stop hosting common services. Quit forwarding standard ports, because that's asking for it. So if you're forwarding port 22 or port 80 or other an FTP port into your system somewhere, stop that. You got to figure out a different way to do that.
I'll point out port 80 for a DVR is suicide at some point. So if you have a DVR on your network, get it off that network, segment it. Don't forward that port 80. It's very, very dangerous.
Remove internally hosted VPNs, like to a particular computer. Let your router handle VPN traffic, and use site-to-site when possible. Content web filtering, this is terrific. We happen to we don't, my little stations don't pay for any content web filtering, but we use OpenDNS. And so we have a little client that runs. OpenDNS knows who we are. It knows that DNS requests coming from this IP address or that IP address are from us, and it knows what level of filtering we want. And OpenDNS, they stay very well on top of things like the constantly changing URIs that ransomware software is using, because it goes and gets some crypto keys right then when it runs. Well, if it can't get to the control and command server to get its crypto keys, then guess what? It can't encrypt your software. So, and of course we try to keep people from going to naughty sites, things like that. But it's a lot more than just keeping people off of those kind of sites. So that can really help a lot. You can pay for OpenDNS, and there's other ones you can actively pay for running a DNS server at your own facility. But you can really save yourself a lot of trouble that way.
You can also do that through endpoint security products.
Yes.
Like you said, endpoint security or some of the others.
Like ESET, is that what you're talking about?
Yep.
Okay. And then segmenting networks, business and operations on separate networks, at least separate VLANs, if nothing else, and guests completely isolated. And the fifth thing, everybody get a picture of that one if you need it? Okay. And number 5, have a backup. 3 places or it's not backed up. That's the old photographer's mantra. One has to be off-site and off-network. It's not good enough just to back it up at your facility across town, because guess what? It's on the same network. And ransomware can just go and encrypt those files as well, too. Cloud or local incremental file back. So incremental lets you go get 3 versions back of this commercial or that spot or that payroll. And then finally, bare metal restore points. I think I know what that is, but Noah, tell me what a bare metal...
A bare metal would be like a system image backup, to where if that has a complete system failure, you can restore that exactly how it was in operable condition.
Okay.
It's key for uptime. Saves a ton of time.
Basically, this keeps you from having to go through the Windows installation process, go through all the drivers.
Updates.
You build your system image. If you have a lot of common hardware, which we in Broadcast do, we typically deploy multiple machines at once, specifically for automation purposes. So you build an image when you first get new hardware in. And then if anything ever happens to that, you've got that system image to go back to, and now all you have to do is patch it current and install whatever the software you want. It's already a complete install with all the drivers loaded.
Good deal. Picture of that. Good deal. And I thought I was buying a stock image of people raising their hands, and actually, everybody has two hands up. They're either under arrest or they're calling for a touchdown. Not sure which. We're probably out of time.
We're over time. You guys all know that. But with still a lot of good information, this will be up on the website soon as they can get it up there, the audio of it, and I'm pretty sure we'll have the slides too. Want to thank you guys. It was a great session. Really appreciate all your efforts.
Thank you.
Trying to keep us secure, and I'm sure we'll still find people.